After 3.5 years, over 300,000 rounds of ammunition, and a lot of money invested in my own training, I want to share a few things I would do differently if I could start all over again to save you from frustration, save you time, save you money. So if you're interested, make sure to stay tuned to this video. Welcome back, I'm Myles at Hyve, and if you've been following our channel for quite a while, you know that I've been obsessed with firearms training and anything defensive, and we've documented a lot of it on YouTube and on our website. And I was thinking about it the other day. It's been about 3.5 years where I've started to really just go crazy over firearms training. I shot a lot of rounds, invested a lot of money, and I thought it'd be a great idea to share what I would do differently if I could start all over again. Because now that I have more experience, I know that there would have been definitely more effective and efficient ways to approach my training. So I have 6 things top of mind that I want to share with you. Let's start off with number 1. I would go to less classes and practice a whole lot more. Now, what do I mean by that? So first off, I've gone to tons of classes. If you followed us from the early days, I used to go to a lot of classes and used to review a lot of classes. And I've noticed also in holding our own classes, there are a lot of people who will go to tons of classes, go to different instructors, which is a great idea, to get different pointers, different lessons from lots of different instructors out there. But what I've noticed with my own training early on, as well as with the students who go to our classes, a lot of them tend to jump from instructor to instructor to instructor to instructor to try and learn the secret sauce. But the reality is, as any good shooter or any tactician or operator will tell you, the magic is not really in going to a lot of classes. It's taking what you've learned in those classes and beginning to practice them, apply them, master them. And that only happens through lots of practice. When I started, I went to a lot of classes, but then I quickly learned that there was a gap in my training. I didn't get enough reps to really master the things that I learned, let's say, in a class a month before this current class that I was taking. And I noticed that also it's the same experience our students have as well, where they're hopping around, but again, you don't have that time to master the technique. So I like to think of going to classes as training, and I like to define training as where you're trying to add more tools to your toolbox. Maybe you've hit a plateau and you want to learn new things, so you go to different classes. But when you're in a class, it's not enough time to master a particular skill. This is where practice comes in. Practice is where you have the opportunity to do lots of reps, to become consistent, where you can really hone in on the technique or the different tactics that you're learning. The big problem is, personally, and in my experience with other students, there's too much of a focus on the training aspect, which again, there's nothing wrong with it, but you have to spend a lot more time practicing to master the skill sets. Let's move on to number 2. The second thing I would do differently is to focus in on one platform at a time. When I first started Hyve and started to really take training seriously, I tried everything. And you're probably the same way. If you got serious into training, you started practicing with a rifle, then maybe a pistol, as well as a shotgun and a long gun. You wanted to do everything. And again, I was the same way. But when I began to focus in on one weapon system, one platform, that's when I saw my skill set skyrocket. The past 1.5 years, I decided that instead of really just playing around with everything all together, I decided, okay, I'm just going to focus on the pistol. And you'll notice this in a lot of our videos too, where I haven't been really doing everything else. And originally I did everything because we had, a lot of different content pieces, and this will segue into the third thing I changed differently, but also because we do lots of different types of content and different training, tactical training, CCW training, sport training. So for me in the beginning, it was necessary. I had to use all the platforms. But then, I realized that I wanted to really begin to master a platform. And I decided to stick with the pistol. One, because I'm a concealed carrier, and chances are for civilians, if we're in a deadly conflict, we most likely are going to be using our pistol. So this is what I chose. And as I mentioned, my skills have skyrocketed because I could focus 100% of my time and effort into mastering all the little details, the intricacies of pistol marksmanship. That's not to say that I stopped shooting rifles and shotguns and things like that. I still absolutely did and still do. It's just that now primary focus is on the pistol. After 1.5 years of really honing in on the pistol, now I'm at a point where, okay, I'm ready for the next level. So this way I've mastered or built a certain level of proficiency with the pistol, and I'm very happy with it. Now I'm going to move on to the next platform rather than try to do everything at once, which can actually hinder your progress. So that's the second thing I do differently. I focus in on one platform at a time from the very beginning. The third thing I do differently is I would focus in on one style of training, or if you want to put it another way, one style of shooting if you're primarily focused on the marksmanship side of things. What I mean by that is I really dove into concealed carry training for civilians, defensive training. I did militaristic training where I was in full kit, doing sniper training, CQB training, which also some people may not feel is practical for them because, again, it is something that the military would do. Then I also dove into competitive shooting, and I tried doing all three at the same time. Now what this does is it just spreads yourself too thinly because each style of shooting or training is a little different. There are pros and cons to each one, but you have to change context every single time for each of those three different areas. Some of the tactics are not going to be similar, and so it's very easy to get confused, and it's easy for one to get mixed up with the tactics they should use for one particular style of training. The past year and a half, 2 years, I've been hyper-focused on competitive shooting. I chose that because it's really fun. I think that's one of the best ways to improve your pistol marksmanship, and it's something that gives you a goal to strive for. You're always trying to do better, and you're trying to win the competitions. Similar to tip number 2, it's not to say that I just threw tactical training and defensive training out the window, but my focus was on competitive shooting. This way, all my attention can really be on improving in that particular arena. If I started competitive shooting long ago with the type of focus that I'm talking to you about, I probably would have seen a lot more progress. I'd definitely be at a better place than I am right now in competitive shooting. It's not to say, just like tip number 2, it's not to say that you get rid of or you don't pay attention to defensive shooting or anything like that, or whichever one that you choose. Let's say you start off with tactical training. It's not to say that competitive shooting or concealed carry shooting is not valuable. But what this does is it is going to allow you to get better faster at that particular arena. Then, as soon as you build a solid base, you can move on to the next arena or the next style of shooting or training, and you're going to have a very good foundation. So I would recommend doing that. Whereas if you're trying to spread yourself thinly, you get confused, you might slow or hinder your progress. So think about that. For me, I chose competitive shooting, as I mentioned. You might choose something else, but that is going to allow you to get really good, really fast with that particular arena. Then you can move on to the next style. Speaking of the style of training, if you are in this game for defensive purposes, it's important to realize that there's a lot of tools out there that you can use for your personal safety or your family's personal safety. A lot of the content we create revolves around firearms, but in any real-life altercation, generally speaking, the tools you use or implement must match the threat level presented to you. For example, you might be threatened or maybe bullied by somebody, maybe you're getting an argument and they're pushing you around, but they don't seem like a deadly threat. They don't have a weapon or anything like that. You can't brandish your gun. You can't draw your gun. That can get you in a lot of legal trouble. So instead of that, you might want to think about non-lethal options. I carry pepper spray. I've made videos on this, about this, and these non-lethal options have a place in your toolbox. There's a ton of different options out there, from pepper spray to tasers to stun guns to even batons. And our partner, the Home Security Superstore, offers an array of different options for you to add to your toolbox. Check them out in the description below, and I guarantee that you'll find something that you can add to your toolbox. The fourth thing I would do differently is to not get caught up in all of the debates and arguments over techniques. If you read the story about why I started Tactical Hyve, it was because of that. I would talk to somebody who was very reputable. They would tell me to do one thing. Then I would talk to somebody else who was very reputable. They would tell me, don't do that thing, it'll get you killed. So there was always constant debate. And what I realized in this industry is that the vast majority of discussion out there revolves around technique and not the principles that underlie all of the techniques. So if you are always arguing about certain things, you may be talking about technique, which is a matter of style. So it's just like I dress a certain way, you dress a certain way, and let's just say that the whole goal of dressing up was to stay warm. So we're both doing it, but we just have a different style in doing it. But the principles underlying the style or the techniques never change among different shooters, different practitioners. So if you understand the principles, then you don't have to get involved in all these debates. And the reason why I'm sharing this is because I've come across a lot of our own students who are frustrated because we always encourage and advocate that our students train with lots of different people out there. But in doing so, they are going to hear different takes on different techniques. But again, it's not really the techniques that you should focus on, it's really the underlying principles. So understand that so that you can avoid frustration, avoid confusion, know going in to the firearms industry or just the training industry as a whole, that you're going to hear a lot of different opinions and different takes on things, but it's always situational dependent, and they might be talking again about that surface level technique rather than the principles. The fifth thing I would do differently is I would have started training with competitive shooters much earlier. Competitive shooters have a big advantage over anyone else when it comes to shooting because that's all they do. In contrast to, let's say, an operator, someone who is in Special Forces, a Navy SEAL, so on and so forth, there's a lot of things on their plate. They have to know how to shoot, they have to know how to land nav, they have to know how to do CQB, they need to understand tactics, so on and so forth. There's a lot more. Shooting is a very small part of what they do. Whereas a competitive shooter, because all of their focus is on shooting, they know all the little details. They have many ways to address problems and diagnose issues, whereas somebody who, let's say, was trained in law enforcement or by the military, they may have a good enough approach. Whereas, again, competitive shooters, they've spent a lot of time, so they become masters at their craft. When I started my competitive shooting journey, I was about 1 to a year and a half in my shooting journey, and I noticed a huge difference in competitive shooters' understanding of weapon platforms and also how to really perform at the highest level, shooting very accurately, very fast. And as I've mentioned in a lot of other videos, what they do, there's a lot of carryover. There's a lot of pros to competitive shooting that can be taken into defensive or militaristic training. So if you've never done competitive shooting or you've never learned from a competitive shooter, I highly recommend looking into it. And the last thing I would do differently is I would start force-on-force training as early as possible. I can't recommend this enough. It is such an eye-opening experience. The truth is, a lot of people will say that force-on-force training is probably the most valuable training you can get. This is placing yourself in realistic scenarios using non-lethal ammunition. But the sad thing is most people will never do it, particularly civilians. They know about it, but they just won't do it. I do not truly understand why, because the cost of a force-on-force class is comparable to a normal marksmanship class. For any of you who follow Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or the UFC, I like to use this analogy. When the UFC came out, Royce Gracie dominated with Jiu-Jitsu, and it's because he had this secret weapon, and he had a true understanding of what it was like to have a one-on-one fight with somebody. And if you do force-on-force training, you will have a much more realistic understanding and expectation of a true deadly encounter. Royce Gracie's opponents in the UFC had no idea what they were facing. They didn't know what they didn't know. Similarly, people who don't do force-on-force training are also not going to know what they don't know. Things happen fast. If you think that you're going to be able to shoot the way you shoot on a flat range or in competition, you might want to think again. There's just so much value to force-on-force training that I don't want to dive into it. I believe we've created separate videos on it if you're interested. But the point here is this. If you're training for defensive purposes, it's important to realize what a true deadly encounter will be like. Flat range training does not give that to you. It could even possibly give you a false sense of confidence. So if I could go back in time, from day one, I would do force-on-force training. And don't worry if you don't really shoot well or anything like that. The reason why I'm saying I would do it from day one is force-on-force training is less about the shooting. Okay, that you could always learn on your own. You're going to be going to the flat range, learn how to shoot. But force-on-force training is about problem solving, quick decision making, situational awareness, understanding what's happening around you so that you can make those decisions quickly. There's a lot of value to it, so I would would definitely do it from day one. So hopefully those 6 personal lessons learned are helpful to you. I want to try and save you money, time, frustration, and that's exactly what I would do if I could go back in time. I'm not saying that I'm upset with where I am in my journey, but I definitely feel I could have made bigger leaps and bounds in my performance if I can go back in time and make those little adjustments. Anyway, hope you guys liked the video. Let us know what you think in the comments below. And if you're not yet subscribed, make sure to subscribe because we release a video every single day. And if you want to be up to speed on all the topics we release, make sure you hit that bell to be notified. See you guys next time.